Welcome to the channel Fear of Darkness. Today's story tells the impossible truth about an enslaved man who became the heir to a Gilded Age mansion and dared to challenge America's richest dynasty. What unfolded next defied the laws of his time, threatened an empire built on silence and power, and revealed a secret the system was never designed to confront. This is a heavy and intense account. Take a moment, breathe, and listen carefully. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments which city and country you're listening from. Your participation helps keep these stories remembered instead of buried. Stay until the end, because this story forces a question history still refuses to answer. Let's begin. In the autumn of 1891, a black man walked through the gardens of one of America's most expensive mansions. He wore a tailored suit worth more than most workers earned in an entire year. His shoes were polished to a shine, and his posture was flawless. When armed guards surrounded him with weapons drawn, he didn't run, and he didn't beg. He simply smiled and spoke 7 words that would change everything. "Tell Theodore that Bessie's son came home." The guards froze. The head of security, a man named Patrick O'Brien, who had served the Harrington family for 15 years, felt his blood turn cold. He had heard that name before. Bessie. It was a name never spoken inside the mansion. A name that belonged to a ghost. A name the Harrington family had paid handsomely to erase from history. By the time O'Brien recovered enough to ask for the stranger's name, the man had vanished into the night. He left no trace, no footprints, no evidence he had ever been there at all. But inside Rosecliff Manor, behind marble walls and golden chandeliers, panic had already begun to spread. Who was this man? Where did he come from? And what did he know about Bessie? This is the true story of Solomon Graves. A man born into slavery who died a millionaire. A man who spent 30 years planning the destruction of one of America's most powerful families. A man who proved that revenge, when served cold enough, can burn hotter than any fire. But to understand how Solomon Graves brought down the Harrington dynasty, we need to go back to the beginning. Back to a cotton plantation in Georgia. Back to the year 1849. Back to the night a baby was born in secret, setting in motion events that would shake the foundations of the Gilded Age. The Magnolia Fields plantation sprawled across 12,000 acres of prime Georgia farmland. It was owned by Augustus Harrington II, heir to a railroad fortune stretching from Savannah to New York. In 1849, Augustus was 32 years old. He had a wife named Helena, who came from old Charleston money. He had a 5-year-old son named Edward and a 2-year-old named Theodore. And he had 347 slaves working his cotton fields from sunrise to sunset. Among those slaves was a woman named Bessie. She was 24 years old. Born on the plantation, she had never once set foot beyond its borders. Her mother, a field hand, had died of fever when Bessie was 9. Her father was unknown, as was the case for most slaves, but Bessie stood apart from the other workers at Magnolia Fields. She was beautiful in a way that stopped people and made them stare. Her skin held the color of honey. Her eyes were large and expressive. At 16, she had been chosen to work inside the big house as a domestic servant. Working inside the big house was considered a privilege. The work was lighter, the food better, the beatings less frequent. But it came with dangers field hands never faced, dangers Bessie understood all too well. Augustus Harrington first noticed Bessie while she served dinner to his guests on a hot summer evening in 1847. She was 22. He was 30 and bored with his fragile wife, who seemed sick more often than healthy. The way Bessie moved through the dining room, graceful, silent, caught his attention. The way she kept her eyes down yet still managed to see everything fascinated him. Within a week, he had arranged for her transfer to his personal study as a cleaner. Within a month, everyone in the slave quarters knew what happened behind those closed doors. No one spoke about it, not out loud, not where anyone could hear, but they all knew. The other slaves saw how Bessie returned to the quarters late at night with her dress disheveled and her eyes empty. They saw how the master sent for her whenever his wife visited relatives. They saw, and they understood, and they kept their mouths shut, because speaking would mean death. In the spring of 1849, Bessie realized she was pregnant. She tried to hide it as long as she could, wrapping her belly in cloth, wearing looser dresses, avoiding the mistress of the house at all costs. But by August, hiding was impossible. Her belly had grown too large. The baby was too close to coming. Everyone on the plantation waited to see what would happen. Helena Harrington, Augustus's wife, was not a stupid woman. She knew about her husband's visits to the slave quarters. She knew about Bessie. When she saw Bessie's swollen belly, she knew exactly whose child it carried. But Helena was also practical. She came from a world where men did what men did, and wives looked the other way. Causing a scandal would only hurt herself. So she did what women of her class did in those situations. She pretended not to see, pretended not to know, and waited for the problem to solve itself. The baby came on September 15, 1849, in a small cabin at the edge of the slave quarters. An old slave woman named Martha, who had delivered more than 100 babies in her 60 years, helped Bessie through the birth. It was a difficult labor. Bessie screamed for hours. The other slaves stood outside the cabin, listening, praying, hoping mother and child would survive. Just before midnight, a baby boy took his first breath. Bessie held him in her arms and cried, not from sadness, not from joy, but from something in between. She knew what her son's life would be, a slave like her, working the fields like her mother, suffering like everyone she had ever loved. But looking at his face, at his tiny fingers, at his eyes already hinting at gray, she made a decision. "Your name is Solomon," she whispered. "And one day, you're going to be free." Old Martha, cleaning up after the birth, heard those words. She also noticed something else, something that made her pause. The baby's skin was lighter than Bessie's. Much lighter. And those gray eyes weren't the eyes of a slave. They were the eyes of Augustus Harrington. Martha had been on the plantation for 40 years. She had seen things, kept secrets, learned how to survive. And she knew this baby, this evidence of the master's sin, was in terrible danger. If Helena Harrington decided the child threatened her own son's inheritance, she could have him sold or killed with a single word. So Martha did something she had never done before. After Bessie fell asleep, exhausted from the birth, Martha took a small object from her pocket. It was a gold medallion she had found in the master's study years ago, dropped and forgotten behind a bookshelf. The medallion bore the initials A.H. Augustus Harrington. Martha had kept it hidden, not knowing why, just sensing it might one day matter. That night, she buried the medallion under an old oak tree at the edge of the property. She marked the spot with 3 small stones and made her own decision. If this child ever needed proof of who his father was, the proof would be waiting. Solomon Graves grew up in the shadow of the big house. He lived with his mother in a small cabin with 1 window, 1 door, and a dirt floor. He ate cornmeal mush for breakfast and beans for dinner. He wore clothes patched and repatched until more patches remained than original fabric. And from age 5, he worked. His first job was carrying water to the field hands. He woke before dawn, filled 2 wooden buckets from the well, and walked back and forth across the cotton fields until his arms felt ready to fall off. If he spilled water, he was beaten. If he moved too slowly, he was beaten. If he looked at a white person without lowering his eyes, he was beaten. This was his life. The only life he knew. But Bessie refused to let Solomon's spirit die. Every night, after work ended and the overseer slept, she sat with him in their cabin and taught him things slaves were forbidden to learn. She taught him to read, using a Bible stolen from the big house 1 page at a time. She taught him numbers with pebbles and sticks. She taught him about the world beyond the plantation, a world she had never seen but heard about from slaves sold and moved from place to place. There's a whole country out there, she would tell him. Cities bigger than anything you can imagine. Places where black people are free, where they own businesses, wear fine clothes, and nobody can tell them what to do. Solomon listened with wide eyes. "Can we go there, Mama?" Bessie stroked his hair and smiled sadly. "Someday, baby. Someday." But she knew the truth. There was no escape from Magnolia Fields. The plantation was surrounded by miles of wilderness. Runaway slaves were hunted with dogs and guns. Those caught were whipped until their backs became raw meat, then put back to work as warnings to others. Bessie had seen it happen, heard the screams. She knew running meant almost certain death. So she did the only thing she could. She gave her son knowledge. She gave him hope. And she gave him a secret. When Solomon was 7, Bessie told him the truth about his father. They sat by the creek running along the plantation's edge. It was Sunday afternoon, the only time slaves were allowed a few hours of rest. Solomon threw stones into the water, watching them skip across the surface. Bessie watched him, building courage to say what she had wanted to say for years. "Solomon, baby, there's something I need to tell you." He looked at her with those gray eyes so like his father's. "What is it, Mama?" She took a deep breath. "You know how the other children have fathers who live in the quarters with them? How they know who their daddies are?" Solomon nodded. He had noticed. He had wondered. But he had learned, like all slave children learned, that some questions weren't safe to ask. "Your daddy doesn't live in the quarters, Solomon. Your daddy lives in the big house." The boy was confused. The big house. But only white people live in the big house. Bessie took his small hands in hers. "That's right, baby. Your daddy is a white man. Your daddy is Master Harrington." Solomon was too young to fully understand what that meant. But he understood enough. He understood why his skin was lighter than other children's. He understood why the master sometimes looked at him with an expression half guilt, half something else. He understood why the mistress of the house stared with cold hatred whenever he came near. He was different. He had always known he was different. Now he knew why. "Does he know?" Solomon asked. "Does he know I'm his son?" Bessie nodded. "He knows, baby. He knows. Then why doesn't he help us? Why doesn't he set us free?" Bessie pulled her son close and held him tight. "Because that's not how this world works, Solomon. That's not how it works for people like us. But someday, baby, things are going to change. And when they do, I need you to remember who you are. You're not just a slave. You're not just property. You're the son of Augustus Harrington. And one day, they're going to know it." Solomon never forgot those words. They burned themselves into his memory like a brand. Years later, when everything had been taken from him, those words would fuel his survival. The overseer at Magnolia Fields was a man named Silas Crenshaw. He was 45, 6 feet tall, with hands like slabs of meat. He had worked as an overseer for 20 years, first in Mississippi, then Alabama, finally Georgia. Throughout the region, he was known as a man who could break any slave, no matter how stubborn. Plantation owners paid premium wages for his services. Silas took an immediate dislike to Solomon. It wasn't personal, at least not at first. Silas disliked all slaves. He considered them animals, less than animals, tools that could talk but held no more value than a plow or mule. But Solomon was different. Solomon looked him in the eye when other slaves looked at the ground. Solomon asked questions when other slaves kept silent. Solomon carried something Silas recognized from years of breaking men: pride. And Silas Crenshaw was very, very good at destroying pride. The beatings started when Solomon was 10. Silas would find reasons, invent reasons, create reasons, to punish the boy. Solomon brought water too slowly. Solomon looked at a white visitor wrong. Solomon hummed while working, which was disrespectful to the master's peace. Every offense, real or imagined, met the whip. The scars accumulated on Solomon's back like a map of suffering. By 12, his skin had become a patchwork of raised welts and smooth burns. Each told a story. Each taught a lesson about what it meant to be property. But Silas never managed to break Solomon's spirit. No matter how many beatings, no matter how much pain, something in Solomon's eyes remained undefeated, a spark, a flame, something refusing to die. "That boy ain't right," Silas would tell the other white workers. Got something wrong in his head. Look at the way he looks at you, like he's thinking things, like he's planning things. The other workers would nod and agree, because agreeing with Silas was the safe thing to do. But they all noticed the same thing: Solomon wasn't like the other slaves, and that made him dangerous. What none of them knew was that Silas had his own suspicions about Solomon's parentage. He had seen the boy's gray eyes, noticed the light skin, heard the whispers in the quarters about Bessie and the master. He had put the pieces together. If Solomon was indeed Augustus Harrington's son, that made him a threat, not to Silas personally, but to the natural order. The idea that a slave could carry his master's blood, could be half-white, could potentially claim connection to the Harrington family, was an abomination. It went against everything Silas believed about racial separation. So Silas beat Solomon harder than the others. He gave him the worst jobs. He made his life a living hell. In Silas's mind, he was doing God's work, putting a mongrel in his place, maintaining the proper order of the world. And Solomon absorbed every beating and stored it away in his memory. He remembered every blow, every insult, every drop of blood. He didn't cry out. He didn't beg for mercy. He simply endured, remembered, and waited. Because his mother had taught him things would change someday. And when that day came, Solomon intended to be ready. The year 1861 changed everything. The Civil War began in April when Confederate forces fired on Fort Sumter in South Carolina. Within weeks, the entire country was at war. Southern states, including Georgia, seceded from the Union. Young men marched off to fight. And on plantations across the South, slaves began whispering about something they had never dared hope for: freedom. Solomon was 12 when the war started. He didn't fully understand what was happening, but he understood enough. He understood people were fighting over whether slavery should exist. He understood Northern armies wanted to free the slaves. He understood that if the North won, his life would never be the same. The war years were hard at Magnolia Fields. Most young white men had gone to fight, leaving the plantation short-staffed. Food became scarce as the Confederate Army requisitioned supplies. The slaves worked harder than ever to compensate for missing workers. And Silas Crenshaw, too old to fight, grew even more brutal as his frustration mounted. But something else hung in the air, something the slaves could feel but couldn't name. Hope. The possibility that the world they knew was ending. That someday, maybe soon, they would wake up free. Augustus Harrington watched the war with growing dread. He was 50 now, his health failing. His railroad empire, once stretching across the South, was being destroyed by Union forces. Every week brought news of another blown bridge, another burned depot, another cut line. His fortune, once so secure, slipped through his fingers like sand. And in quiet hours of the night, Augustus thought about Bessie, about Solomon, about the son he had never acknowledged, about the weight of his sins. Helena Harrington had died in 1858, finally succumbing to the illness plaguing her for years. Augustus hadn't remarried. His legitimate sons, Edward and Theodore, both served in the Confederate Army. Edward was a captain. Theodore was a lieutenant. They fought to preserve a way of life their father had built, fighting to keep people like Solomon in chains. One evening in spring 1862, Augustus did something no one expected. He called his lawyer to the plantation and dictated a new will. The lawyer, a nervous man named Samuel Whitfield, listened with growing alarm as Augustus spoke. The will contained the usual provisions: the plantation to Edward, the eldest, railroad interests to Theodore, various sums to distant relatives and charities. Then Augustus added a clause that made Whitfield's pen freeze mid-stroke. I wish to acknowledge my natural son, born to the slave woman Bessie in 1849. Upon my death, Solomon is to be freed from bondage and granted the sum of $50,000, to be held in trust until he reaches age 40. Whitfield looked up from his papers. Sir, I must advise you, this clause is highly irregular. It could be contested. It could cause scandal. Augustus waved dismissively. I don't care about scandal. I'm dying, Whitfield. I can feel it in my bones. I'll be damned if I face my maker without trying to make things right. "But sir, the other provisions. My legitimate sons will inherit everything else. This is a pittance compared to what they're getting. But it's something. It's acknowledgement that the boy exists, that he matters, that he's my blood." Whitfield had no choice but to comply. He wrote down Augustus's words, had the documents signed and witnessed, and locked them away in his office safe. He hoped, for everyone's sake, the will would never see daylight, that Augustus would recover and change his mind, that the war would end and things return to normal. But things were never going to be normal again. The night of March 12, 1863, started like any other at Magnolia Fields. The slaves finished work at sundown, ate their meager dinners, and slept in their cabins. The moon was full, casting silver light across cotton fields. The air felt warm for March, hinting at summer heat to come. Solomon was 14. He had grown tall, with broad shoulders and strong arms from years of hard labor. He slept in the same cabin as his mother, on a straw mattress more whole than mattress. The sound of crickets drifted through the window. The smell of wood smoke hung in the air. He was dreaming when the screams started. Solomon's eyes snapped open. For a moment, confusion, were the screams part of his dream or something real? Then he smelled smoke and knew, fire. He jumped from his mattress and looked around the cabin. His mother's bed was empty. The door stood open. Outside, orange light flickered against the darkness. Their cabin was on fire. Solomon ran outside, coughing as smoke filled his lungs. The entire front wall blazed, flames climbing dry wooden walls like living things. Somewhere in that inferno, his mother was screaming, "Mama!" Solomon ran toward the cabin, but heat drove him back. The flames were too intense. He couldn't see through the wall of fire. "Mama!" He tried again, shielding his face with his arms, forcing himself closer. His skin blistered from heat. His eyes watered from smoke. But he kept going, kept pushing, because his mother was in there, and he had to save her. Then he saw her. Bessie crawled through the doorway, her clothes on fire, her skin blackened and peeling. She had managed to drag herself almost to the threshold before flames overwhelmed her. Her eyes found Solomon through smoke. Her mouth moved, forming words he could barely hear over the fire's roar. The medallion. Martha. The oak tree. Solomon reached through flames and grabbed his mother's hand. He pulled with all his strength, dragging her out of the burning cabin. Her dress fell away in charred pieces. Her hair was gone. Her face was barely recognizable. But she was alive. Barely. "Mama, hold on. Please hold on." Bessie's eyes were fading. Her breath came in short, painful gasps. But she had one more thing to say, one more secret to share. "Avenge our blood." Then she was gone. Solomon held his mother's body in the dirt outside the burning cabin. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He simply sat there holding her while the fire consumed everything they had owned. The other slaves gathered around, watching, not knowing what to say or do. This kind of thing happened. Fires broke out. People died. It was the nature of life on a plantation. But Solomon knew something the others didn't. He had seen something in the moments before the fire started, a figure standing in the shadows near their cabin. A white man watching. Not trying to help. Not raising the alarm. Just watching. And when the fire started, the figure walked away. Solomon didn't know who the man was. Smoke and darkness had hidden his features. But he knew one thing for certain, the fire wasn't an accident. Someone had murdered his mother. And whoever it was, Solomon would find them. The days after Bessie's death passed in a blur of grief and rage. Solomon buried his mother in the slave cemetery at the plantation's edge, an unmarked grave identical to all the others. He had no money for a headstone, no permission for a proper funeral. He simply dug a hole, lowered her body into earth, and covered it with dirt. The other slaves left him alone. They understood grief. They had all experienced it multiple times, losing parents, children, spouses, friends, taken by death, sale, or their master's casual cruelty. Grief was as common as hunger on a plantation. But Solomon's grief was different. Cold. Hard. Focused. He spent hours thinking about the figure he had seen that night, trying to remember details, piece together clues. The man had been tall, wearing dark clothes. Something about the way he stood, the way he moved, seemed familiar. 3 days after the fire, Solomon remembered old Martha. His mother's last words had mentioned Martha. The oak tree. The medallion. Solomon didn't know what any of it meant, but he knew Martha might have answers. He found her in the evening after work, sitting outside her cabin, smoking a pipe. Martha was over 60 now, ancient by slave standards. Her hair was completely white. Her face was a network of wrinkles. But her eyes remained sharp, still watching, still seeing everything. "Miss Martha," Solomon said, approaching carefully. "Can I talk to you?" Martha looked at him for a long moment. She had been expecting this visit, expecting it for 14 years. "Sit down, child." Solomon sat. "Your mama told you about the oak tree, didn't she?" He nodded. Martha took a long drag from her pipe. "I've been keeping something for you, Solomon. Keeping it since the night you was born. I always knew this day would come. I just hoped it wouldn't come so soon." She told him about the medallion, about the initials, about how she had buried it under the oak tree at the property's edge, marked by 3 stones. She told him about Augustus Harrington, about the affair, about everything she had seen and heard over the years. But there was something else, something even more important. "Inside that medallion, child, there's a key. A tiny little key hidden in the back. I don't know what it opens, never did figure it out. But your mama knew. She told me once it was the key to everything, the key to bringing the Harringtons down." Solomon's heart pounded. "What does it open?" Martha shook her head. "I don't know. Your mama never told me. But she said when the time was right, you would know. You would figure it out." "How am I supposed to figure it out? I'm just a slave. I can't even leave this plantation." Martha reached out and took Solomon's hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "You ain't just a slave, Solomon. You're Augustus Harrington's son. You got his blood in your veins. One day, that blood is going to mean something. One day, you're going to use it to destroy everything he built." She paused, her eyes boring into his. "But not yet. You're too young, too weak. If you try to fight them now, they'll kill you, just like they killed your mama. You need to wait. You need to grow strong. You need to learn everything you can about them and their world. Then, when you're ready, you need to make them pay." Solomon listened to every word. He absorbed it all. And in that moment, sitting outside Martha's cabin as the sun set over magnolia fields, he made a decision that would shape the rest of his life. He would wait. He would grow strong. He would learn. Then he would destroy the Harrington family, one by one, until nothing remained but ashes and memory. The war continued. Union armies pushed deeper into the South. At Magnolia Fields, things fell apart. Augustus Harrington died in January 1865, just months before the war ended. His health, declining for years, finally gave out. He died in his bed, surrounded by servants but not family. His sons still fought. His wife was long dead. And the son he had never acknowledged worked in the fields, unaware his father had drawn his last breath. The will Augustus had written was read 3 days after the funeral. Edward and Theodore Harrington, both granted emergency leave to attend their father's burial, sat in the lawyer's office and listened as their inheritance detailed. Edward received the plantation. Theodore received the railroad interests. Various sums were distributed to relatives and charities. Everything proceeded as expected. Then Whitfield read the final clause. "I wish to acknowledge my natural son Solomon, born to the slave woman Bessie in 1849. The room fell silent. Edward and Theodore looked at each other. Neither spoke, but their faces told the whole story: shock, disgust, and something else, fear. "This is preposterous," Theodore finally said. "Our father would never have written such a thing. He wasn't in his right mind." Whitfield shifted uncomfortably. "I assure you, Mr. Harrington, your father was of sound mind when he dictated this will. I witnessed it myself." "Then you witnessed a fraud," Edward said, his voice cold and controlled. "This document is clearly a forgery. Some scheme by abolitionists to embarrass our family." "Sir, I must protest." "You must do nothing," Theodore interrupted. "This will is invalid. The clause about the slave is especially invalid, as it violates numerous laws regarding property disposition. We will not honor it." Whitfield knew arguing was pointless. He had seen that look in the Harrington brothers' eyes before, the look of men accustomed to getting what they wanted by any means necessary. "What do you wish me to do with the document?" he asked. Edward and Theodore exchanged another glance. A silent communication passed between them. "Destroy it," Edward said. "Burn it. Pretend it never existed." And so Samuel Whitfield, lawyer, witness, and coward, did exactly that. He took the will acknowledging Solomon as Augustus Harrington's son, the will that would have granted him freedom and $50,000, and burned it in his office fireplace. The ashes floated up the chimney and disappeared into the night sky. And Solomon, still working the fields, never knew how close he had come to a different life. The war ended in April 1865. Robert E. Lee surrendered to Ulysses Grant at Appomattox Courthouse, and the Confederacy collapsed. Within weeks, Union soldiers arrived at Magnolia Fields and informed the slaves they were free. Solomon was 15. He had spent his entire life in bondage, never traveling more than a mile from where he was born. Suddenly, impossibly, he was told he could go anywhere, do anything, be anyone. The other slaves celebrated. They sang, danced, hugged each other, and cried tears of joy. For them, this was the moment generations had dreamed about, the day they would finally be treated as human beings. But Solomon didn't celebrate. He stood apart from the others, watching the Union soldiers with suspicious eyes. He had learned not to trust white people. He had learned freedom could be a trick, a trap, another way to hurt you when you least expected it. And besides, he had unfinished business. Before leaving Magnolia Fields forever, Solomon went to the oak tree Martha had described. He dug beneath its roots, following her directions, and found the medallion. It was tarnished from years in earth, but the initials AH remained visible. Opening the back, just as Martha had described, he found the tiny key hidden inside. Solomon held the key in his palm and stared at it. This small piece of metal connected somehow to his mother's death, to the Harringtons, to a secret someone had killed to protect. He didn't know what the key opened. He didn't know how he would find out. But he made a promise to himself and to his mother's memory. He would discover the truth, use it to destroy the Harringtons, and make them suffer the way they had made his mother suffer. With the medallion around his neck and the key in his pocket, Solomon Graves walked off Magnolia Fields plantation for the first and last time. He didn't look back. He didn't say goodbye. He simply walked north toward a future he couldn't imagine, carrying the past with him like a weight. He was 15. He owned nothing but the clothes on his back. He knew no one in the world outside the plantation. And he was going to war, a war lasting 30 years, a war he intended to win. The years after the war proved brutal for former slaves. Freedom, it turned out, wasn't the same as safety, food, or shelter. Across the South, millions of black men, women, and children found themselves released from bondage but abandoned to a hostile world wanting them dead. Solomon Graves walked north with nothing but determination. He traveled at night to avoid bands of white men roaming the countryside, hunting freed slaves for sport. He ate whatever he could find, berries, roots, animals caught with bare hands. He slept in ditches and abandoned barns, always with one eye open, always ready to run. It took 3 weeks to reach Savannah. The city was chaos. Union soldiers patrolled streets, freed slaves crowded into makeshift camps waiting for help that never came. Disease spread through camps like wildfire. People died daily from cholera, typhoid, simple starvation. Solomon didn't stay in camps. He had seen enough death. He wanted life. He found work at Savannah docks, loading and unloading ships 12 hours a day. Pay was terrible, just a few cents daily, but it was more money than he had ever seen. He saved every penny. He ate the cheapest food available. He slept in a warehouse corner using a pile of rope as a bed. Every night before sleep, he took out the medallion and looked at the key hidden inside. He didn't know what it opened, didn't know how to find out, but he knew someday, somehow, he would discover the truth. 5 years passed. Solomon learned to read properly during those years. He found a black church offering evening classes. An old preacher named Reverend Thomas taught him to read the Bible, then Shakespeare, then newspapers, then legal documents. Solomon absorbed knowledge like a sponge absorbed water, hungry for it, desperate for it. He understood knowledge was power, and power was what he needed to destroy the Harringtons. He also learned about business. Working docks, he watched how money moved, how ships brought goods from one place and sold them in another, how white men got rich buying low and selling high while black men did all the work and received nothing. By 1870, Solomon had saved enough for his first investment, a small share in a coal shipment heading to Baltimore. The investment was risky. If the ship sank, he would lose everything. But the ship arrived safely, and Solomon's tiny investment doubled. He reinvested the profits and doubled them again. This began Solomon's transformation from former slave into something the world had never seen before, a black man with money, with power, a black man who would use that power to burn down everything the Harrington family had built. Solomon moved to Baltimore in 1870. He was 21 with nearly $1,000 saved, an enormous sum for a black man in those days. But he knew $1,000 was nothing compared to what the Harringtons possessed, nothing compared to what he would need to destroy them. So he kept working, saving, investing. He changed his name during his first Baltimore year. Solomon Graves was a slave name, a name marking him as property, a name that would follow him like a chain. He needed a new name belonging to a free man, a name commanding respect. He chose Samuel Grayson. The name held no particular meaning, he simply liked its sound. Samuel was biblical, strong and dignified. Grayson reminded him of his gray eyes, the eyes marking him as Augustus Harrington's son. Together, the names created a new identity, a blank slate, a man with no past and unlimited future. Samuel Grayson began building his empire. He started with coal, the same coal powering steam engines on Harrington railroads. There was irony in that, and Solomon appreciated irony. Every ton of coal he sold became another brick in his wall, another weapon in his arsenal. He bought shares in coal mines, ships to transport coal, warehouses to store coal. Within 5 years, he controlled a significant portion of mid-Atlantic coal trade. Within 10 years, he ranked among the largest coal merchants on the East Coast. But he didn't stop there. He invested in steel, shipping, real estate. He bought buildings in Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York. He hired white lawyers, who didn't know their employer was a former slave, to manage his business affairs. He created a network of companies and trusts hiding his true identity behind layers of paperwork. To the outside world, Samuel Grayson remained a mysterious figure. Some said he came from Brazil, others from the Caribbean. A few whispered he had mixed blood, that one parent was white. But no one knew the truth. No one suspected Samuel Grayson had once been Solomon Graves, a slave boy from a Georgia plantation. And that was exactly how Solomon wanted it. Throughout those building years, Solomon never forgot his mission. He gathered intelligence about the Harrington family like a general gathering intelligence before battle. He learned Edward Harrington, the eldest brother, had died in 1878. The official story was a hunting accident. Edward had been out with his brother Theodore when his gun accidentally discharged, killing him instantly. But Solomon didn't believe in accidents, not where Harringtons were involved. He hired private investigators, bribed servants and former employees, pieced together what really happened that day in the woods. The truth was ugly but unsurprising. Edward and Theodore had fought for years about family business direction. Edward wanted modernization, investment in new technologies, better worker treatment. Theodore wanted to squeeze every penny from existing operations regardless of cost. The brothers hated each other with hatred only family can produce. Then, during a hunting trip in Virginia mountains, Edward's gun accidentally discharged at point-blank range, blowing half his head off. Theodore was the only witness. Theodore brought the body back. Theodore arranged the funeral, inherited everything, and took control of the Harrington Empire. Solomon knew murder when he saw it. Theodore had killed his own brother to become sole heir, and gotten away with it because he was rich, white, and powerful. The discovery didn't surprise Solomon. It didn't even make him angry. It simply confirmed what he already knew: the Harringtons were monsters. They would destroy anyone in their way, even their own blood. Which meant Solomon would have to be very, very careful. By 1885, Solomon was 46 and worth several $1 million. He had spent 2 decades building fortune and gathering information. He knew almost everything about the Harrington family, Theodore's murder of his brother, the family's history of fraud and bribery, the dozens of workers who had died in their mines and railroads, deaths covered up, families paid off with pocket change. But he still didn't know what the key opened. The tiny key from the medallion had haunted him for over 20 years. He had tried hundreds, thousands of locks, any lock possibly connected to the Harringtons. Nothing worked. The key remained a mystery, and without knowing what it opened, Solomon felt he missed the puzzle's final piece. Then, in summer 1886, a woman came to see him. Her name was Josephine Devereux. She was 50, elegant, well-dressed, and black. She had been a slave at Magnolia Fields, working in the big house as a seamstress. She had known Bessie, known Solomon as a child, and spent 20 post-war years building a new life in Boston, running a successful dress shop catering to wealthy white women. Josephine had tracked Solomon through his business network. It took months to penetrate the secrecy layers he had built around himself, but she was persistent, and she carried information she knew he would want. "I know what that key opens," she said. They sat in Solomon's private Baltimore office. The door locked, windows closed, servants dismissed. Whatever Josephine had to say, he wanted no witnesses. "Tell me," Solomon said. Josephine leaned forward. "There's a hidden compartment in Augustus Harrington's study, a safe built into the wall behind a painting. Nobody knows about it except family. I only found out because I was mending curtains in the study and saw Theodore opening it. He didn't know I was there." Solomon's heart pounded. "What's inside the safe?" "A book. A black leather book. Theodore calls it the family's insurance policy. It contains records of every crime the Harringtons ever committed, bribes, murders, fraud, everything. Augustus started keeping it decades ago as protection against anyone who might betray him. If he went down, he wanted to take everyone else with him. And the key?" Josephine smiled. "The safe has 2 locks. One is a combination lock only Theodore knows. The other is a key lock, a very unusual key lock with a tiny mechanism Augustus designed himself." She pointed at Solomon's chest, where the medallion hung beneath his shirt. "That key is the only one of its kind. Augustus gave it to your mother, probably as some twisted love token. He never imagined she would keep it. Never imagined she would pass it to her son. And he certainly never imagined her son would come back to claim what was his." Solomon sat in silence for a long moment. Everything fell into place: the key, the safe, the book. After more than 20 years searching, he finally understood what his mother had known, what she had died for. The black book was the weapon he needed. It contained proof of everything the Harringtons had done. With that book, he could destroy them, expose their crimes to the world, make them pay for his mother's murder. But there was a problem. "The safe has 2 locks," he said. "I have the key, but I don't have the combination." Josephine nodded. "That's why I came to you. I don't know the combination either, but I know someone who might. Someone who hates Theodore Harrington almost as much as you do." "Who?" "His wife." Catherine. Catherine Harrington was daughter of Boston shipping magnate William Ashford. She married Theodore in 1875, 19 years old to Theodore's 32. It was an arranged marriage designed to merge powerful families and create an even more powerful business alliance. From outside, Catherine appeared the perfect wife, hosting parties, organizing charities, smiling and nodding and saying all the right things. But behind closed doors, her life was a nightmare. Theodore was cruel. He had been cruel as a child, torturing animals, bullying servants. Cruel as a young man, using family money to escape violence as consequences. Cruel as a husband, treating Catherine like property rather than partner. He controlled every aspect of her life, what she wore, who she could talk to, when she could leave the house, when she had to stay. He hit her when she disobeyed, carefully, where bruises wouldn't show. And he constantly reminded her she was nothing without him, that her family's fortune depended on his goodwill, that if she ever tried to leave, he would destroy everyone she loved. Catherine endured 18 years of this treatment. She endured because she had no choice, because society offered no protection for abused wives, because divorce was considered worse than death for women of her class. But deep inside, beneath the smiles and parties and perfect facade, Catherine Harrington was building a fire of her own, a fire of hatred and resentment waiting for the right moment to explode. Solomon would give her that moment. The plan came together over following months. Josephine served as intermediary between Solomon and Catherine. The two women had met years ago at a charity event and maintained secret friendship since. Catherine trusted Josephine, and when Josephine told her about Solomon, his true identity, his plan to destroy Theodore, Catherine was ready to help. She provided mansion layout information, details about Theodore's schedule, names of servants who could be bribed and guards who could be avoided. But she couldn't provide the safe combination. Theodore has never told me, she explained in a letter Josephine delivered. He keeps it locked in his memory. But I believe I know someone who might know. His mother, Edith. Edith Harrington was Augustus's second wife. He married her in 1859 after Helena's death, more for companionship than love. She was 81 now, frail and largely confined to her rooms in Rosecliff Manor. Theodore kept her around because getting rid of her would look bad, but paid her no attention. He assumed she was senile, assumed she knew nothing. He was wrong. Edith had been watching, listening, remembering. For decades, she observed the crimes of her husband and stepson. She kept silent out of fear. But now, at life's end, she was tired of being afraid. She wanted to see justice done before she died, and she was willing to help Solomon make it happen. Catherine arranged a meeting. Solomon arrived at Rosecliff Manor on a night in late September 1891, entering through servants' entrance dressed in simple deliveryman clothes. Catherine met him at the door and led him through back passages and hidden stairways to Edith's private rooms. The old woman waited for him. Edith Harrington was tiny, barely 5 feet tall, with white hair and skin like paper. But her eyes remained sharp, clear, intelligent. She studied Solomon for a long moment, examining his face, his eyes, the shape of his jaw. "You have Augustus's eyes," she finally said. "I noticed it the moment I first saw you at the charity ball last month. Those gray eyes. I spent 40 years looking at those eyes. I would know them anywhere." Solomon sat in the chair Catherine offered. "You know who I am. I know exactly who you are. You're the son he never acknowledged, the child he was too cowardly to claim. The reminder of his sins that he tried to burn away." Solomon's body went rigid. "What do you know about the fire?" Edith's face twisted with old pain. "I know everything. I was there that night, not at the cabin, but in the big house. I saw Theodore talking to Silas Crenshaw earlier that evening. I saw money change hands. And I saw Theodore watching from his window when the flames started. The world seemed to stop. Solomon had always suspected his mother's death was murder, but never proved it, never known who was responsible. Now he knew. "Theodore killed my mother." Edith nodded slowly. "He was afraid. His father had been talking about changing the will, about acknowledging you. Theodore couldn't allow that. He couldn't risk sharing inheritance with a slave's son. So he paid Crenshaw to start the fire, to eliminate the threat. Solomon's hands shook, not from fear, from rage. Pure white-hot rage buried for 30 years. Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you stop him? Edith's eyes filled with tears. Because I was a coward. Because I was afraid of what Theodore would do to me. Because I told myself it wasn't my business, that slaves died all the time, that one more death didn't matter. She reached out and took Solomon's hand. I was wrong. I've spent 40 years knowing I was wrong. I want to make it right before I die. She reached into her dress and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This is the combination to the safe. I watched Augustus open it 100 times. I memorized the numbers without him knowing. Solomon took the paper with trembling fingers. There's more, Edith continued. Inside the safe, along with the black book, there's something else, a document Augustus wrote before he died. A second will. A second will. The first will, the one acknowledging you, was destroyed by Samuel Whitfield after Augustus died. Theodore and Edward forced him to burn it. But Augustus didn't trust Whitfield. He made a copy himself and hid it in the safe. A copy nobody knows about except me. Solomon could barely breathe. Are you saying there's legal proof that I'm Augustus Harrington's son, that I was supposed to inherit? Edith nodded. The will specifies you are entitled to half of all Harrington assets. It also specifies you must claim your inheritance by your 40th birthday or the provision becomes void. Solomon's heart sank. I'm 42. Yes. The legal deadline has passed. You cannot claim inheritance through courts. Edith squeezed his hand. But the will still proves who you are. It proves Augustus acknowledged you as his son. Combined with the black book, it proves Theodore killed your mother to prevent you claiming what was rightfully yours. Solomon understood. The legal battle was lost, but the court of public opinion remained open. If he could expose Harrington crimes, show the world what they had done, he could destroy them as completely as any lawsuit. Perhaps more completely. There's one more thing, Edith said. I need you to promise me something. What? My granddaughter, Lily. She's 17. She's the only innocent person in this family. Theodore is planning to marry her off to a business associate, a horrible man 3 times her age. I need you to protect her. When you bring down the Harringtons, I need you to make sure Lily escapes. Can you promise me that? Solomon looked into the old woman's eyes and saw something unexpected, love. Genuine love for her granddaughter, the only pure thing left in this family of monsters. I promise, he said. Edith smiled, the first real smile she had allowed herself in years. Then go. Take the combination. Find the book. Burn them all to the ground. The plan was set for the Harrington Autumn Ball, scheduled October 2, 1891, the biggest social event of the Newport season. 500 guests, cream of American society, newspaper reporters from every major publication, the perfect stage for Solomon's revelation. But Theodore Harrington wasn't a fool. He had survived this long by being paranoid, trusting no one, eliminating threats before they could grow. And he noticed something wrong, a stranger in Newport, a wealthy black man named Samuel Grayson who appeared from nowhere, asking too many questions, seeming to be everywhere the Harringtons were. Theodore hired Detective Malcolm Vance. Vance was ex-Pinkerton, one of the best, 20 years tracking criminals, exposing secrets, destroying lives. Expensive and effective. Within 2 weeks, he uncovered truth: Samuel Grayson didn't exist before 1870. His entire identity was fabrication. Beneath fabrication lay a former slave from Magnolia Fields named Solomon Graves. Theodore received the report on September 28, 4 days before the ball. He acted immediately. That night, armed men broke into Solomon's rented mansion. They beat him. They dragged him to a warehouse on Newport docks. They tied him to a chair and waited for their employer. Theodore Harrington walked into the warehouse just after midnight. He wore evening clothes, having come directly from a dinner party. His eyes were cold. His smile cruel. "So, you're the bastard," he said, circling Solomon's chair. "The son of the slave my father liked to visit. I thought you died in the fire with your mother." Solomon's face was bloody, ribs cracked, but his voice stayed steady. "Sorry to disappoint you." Theodore laughed, not a pleasant sound. "You've caused me a lot of trouble, Solomon. A lot of worry. All these years, I thought the problem was solved, thought Crenshaw had taken care of everything. But here you are, like a cockroach refusing to die. You admit it, then. You ordered the fire. You killed my mother." Theodore shrugged. "She was a slave. She was a threat. What difference does it make now? No one will believe your word against mine. No court in this country would take Negro testimony over a Harrington." He leaned close to Solomon's face. "You've lost. Whatever you were planning, whatever you thought you'd accomplish, it's over. You're going to disappear tonight. Just like your mother should have disappeared 30 years ago." He turned to his men. "Kill him. Dump the body in the harbor. Make sure it's never found." Solomon closed his eyes. He had come so close to justice, so close to revenge. Now it would end in a dirty warehouse at hired thugs' hands, with no one ever knowing what happened. He thought of his mother, her face in the firelight, her last words, "Avenge our blood." He had failed her. Then shooting started. The first bullet hit the man nearest Solomon. He dropped without a sound. The second hit another man in the shoulder, spinning him around. The third went through warehouse window, missing Theodore by inches. Theodore dove behind crates. His remaining men scattered, drawing weapons, trying to find attack source. More shots, more screams, bodies falling. Then a woman's voice, clear, commanding. "Solomon, can you move?" Solomon opened his eyes. Standing in warehouse doorway, holding smoking revolver, was Catherine Harrington. She wore a simple dark dress. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders. Her face was pale but determined, and she aimed directly at her husband's hiding spot. "Catherine." Theodore's voice was incredulous. "What are you doing?" "What I should have done years ago." She fired another shot, splintering the crate near his head. "Stay down, Theodore. The next one won't miss." She ran to Solomon and cut his ropes with a knife. "Can you walk?" "I think so." His legs were shaky but held. "Then we need to move. More of his men are coming." They fled into night. Behind them, Theodore screamed for guards. Torches lit. Dogs released. The hunt began. Catherine led Solomon through back alleys and hidden paths memorized during her years as Theodore's prisoner. She knew Newport better than anyone, every shadow, hiding place, route avoiding main streets. By dawn, they reached safety, a small cottage on town's outskirts, rented under false name by Josephine, stocked and ready for exactly this emergency. Solomon collapsed onto a bed, body screaming with pain. Catherine cleaned his wounds with water and cloth, working with efficiency of someone who had treated injuries before. "How did you know?" Solomon asked. "How did you know where to find me?" Lily heard Theodore giving orders to his men. "She came to me immediately. She's a good girl, braver than anyone gives her credit for. Theodore will know you helped me. He'll come for you." Catherine's jaw tightened. "Let him come. I'm done being afraid of him. I'm done being his prisoner." She finished bandaging and sat back. "The ball is in 4 days. Can you still do it? Can you still expose him?" Solomon thought about the combination in his pocket, the safe, the black book, the second will. Everything he needed still waited inside Rosecliff Manor. "Yes," he said. "I can still do it. But I'll need help getting inside." Catherine nodded. "You'll have it. Lily and I will make sure every door is open." For the first time in days, Solomon allowed himself hope. The plan was damaged but not destroyed. Theodore thought he was dead, an advantage, an opportunity for surprise. The ball was in 4 days, and Solomon intended to give Newport a night they would never forget. October 2, 1891. Rosecliff Manor blazed with light. Every window glowed. Every chandelier sparkled. Music and laughter drifted across manicured grounds, carried by cool autumn breeze. 500 of America's most powerful people gathered for Harrington Autumn Ball: bankers, industrialists, politicians, newspaper publishers, society matrons dripping diamonds, young men in perfectly tailored suits. The elite of the Gilded Age assembled to celebrate wealth and power and everything money could buy. Theodore Harrington stood at center, accepting congratulations and shaking hands. He had recovered from 4 nights ago. His men found no body in harbor, but also no trace of Solomon. Theodore convinced himself the problem was solved, that Solomon had fled, that he was safe. He was wrong. Solomon Graves entered Rosecliff Manor through servants' entrance at exactly 9 p.m. He disguised as a waiter, simple uniform identical to dozens of black servants moving invisibly through crowd. No one looked twice. No one asked his name. He was invisible. Just another Negro carrying a tray. He made his way through service corridors, following Catherine's mapped route, past kitchens, past wine cellar, up narrow staircase to families' private rooms. The study door was unlocked, just as Catherine promised. Solomon slipped inside and closed the door behind him. Dark, lit only by moonlight streaming through tall windows. Music from ballroom below muffled by thick walls and heavy carpets. The painting hung exactly where Josephine described, a portrait of Augustus Harrington in his prime above the fireplace. Solomon lifted it from wall and found safe behind. 2 locks, 1 combination, 1 key. His fingers trembled as he entered Edith's numbers: 3 turns right, 2 left, 1 right. Click. He pulled medallion from his neck and inserted tiny key into second lock. It fit perfectly. He turned it. Click. The safe swung open. Inside, Solomon found everything Edith promised: the black book bound in leather so dark it seemed to absorb moonlight, yellow documents, and a single sheet of faded handwriting Solomon recognized from old plantation records, the second will, proof he was Augustus Harrington's son. Solomon took everything. He stuffed documents into his jacket. He held the black book against his chest like a shield. Then the door opened. Malcolm Vance stood in doorway, pistol in hand. "Mr. Grayson, or should I say Mr. Graves?" Vance smiled. "Mr. Harrington will be very interested to learn you're still alive." Solomon's mind raced, unarmed, trapped. His plan fell apart for second time in 4 days. Then something unexpected happened. A silver candlestick came down on back of Vance's head. The detective crumpled unconscious. Behind him, holding candlestick, stood a young woman with auburn hair and frightened eyes. Lily Harrington. "Miss Josephine sent me to watch the door," she whispered. "We need to go now." Solomon followed her through more hidden passages, more secret stairs. The girl moved quickly, quietly, clearly terrified but determined to see this through. They emerged near ballroom just as Theodore stepped onto raised platform to address guests. "Ladies and gentlemen," Theodore's voice boomed across crowd. "Thank you for joining what promises to be a historic evening. Tonight, I am pleased to announce a partnership that will reshape American industry." Solomon pushed through servant crowd, ignoring confused looks, ignoring whispered questions. One chance, one moment, he could not waste it. He reached ballroom edge just as Theodore raised champagne glass. "I present to you the future of American railroads, the Harrington-Morgan Alliance. Theodore Harrington." Solomon's voice cut through applause like a knife. Every head turned. 500 pairs of eyes stared at bloody, bruised black men suddenly among them. Theodore's face went pale. "Guards, seize that man." But Solomon was already moving. He pushed past guards, vaulted onto platform, stood face to face with the men who murdered his mother. "My name is Solomon Graves," he announced to stunned crowd. "Son of Bessie Graves. Son of Augustus Harrington. I have a story to tell." The ballroom fell silent, not comfortable pause in conversation, but shocked silence of people confronting something they couldn't understand. Solomon opened the black book. Page 1, January 1852. Bribe paid to Judge William Mercer, Augusta County, to dismiss assault charges against Augustus Harrington. Amount, $5,000. Murmurs rippled through crowd. Page 17, March 1858. Payment to Pinkerton agents to intimidate union organizers at Harrington Rail Yard in Baltimore. 3 workers hospitalized. 1 worker dead. Murmurs grew louder. Page 47, March 12, 1863. Solomon's voice cracked slightly. Order given to Overseer Silas Crenshaw to eliminate the slave Bessie and her son. Method, fire. Result, Bessie killed. Son escaped. Gasps. Shocked faces. Women covering mouths. Theodore lunged forward. This is lies. This man is a fraud, a criminal. But Solomon wasn't finished. Page 72, October 1878. Notes on death of Edward Harrington. Method, staged hunting accident. Reason, to secure sole inheritance of family assets. The room erupted. Edward Harrington had been popular in society, many guests knew him personally. The suggestion Theodore murdered his own brother was explosive. Theodore grabbed Solomon's jacket. You have no proof. This book is a forgery. Is this a forgery, too? An old woman's voice silenced chaos. Everyone turned to see Edith Harrington, supported by Catherine and Lily, walking slowly toward platform. In her hand, she held a letter. This is a confession written by my husband, Augustus Harrington, on his deathbed. It confirms everything this man has said. It acknowledges Solomon as his legitimate son, and describes Harrington family crimes in explicit detail. She handed the letter to a man in front row. Solomon recognized him from newspapers, Joseph Pulitzer, publisher of New York World. Publish it, Edith said. Let the world know what monsters I married into. Theodore's face twisted with rage. He pulled a knife from inside his jacket and lunged at Solomon. The blade caught Solomon's arm, drawing blood. But Solomon had survived worse. He grabbed Theodore's wrist, twisted, forced him to drop knife. Years of physical labor made Solomon strong. Years of hatred made him ruthless. He could have killed Theodore. He wanted to kill Theodore. Every fiber screamed for blood, revenge, justice. But he looked at Theodore's face, pathetic, frightened, and realized something. Killing this man would make Solomon a murderer. It would give Theodore's defenders excuse to dismiss everything revealed. It would taint victory with blood. Solomon released Theodore's wrist and stepped back. I'm not going to kill you, he said. I'm going to do something worse. I'm going to let you live. I'm going to let you watch as everything you built crumbles to dust. Every friend will abandon you. Every ally will betray you. Your name will become a curse. Your legacy will be shame. He turned to the stunned, silent crowd. That is my revenge. The aftermath was everything Solomon hoped and more. Joseph Pulitzer published Edith's letter and Black Book excerpts on New York World's front page. Within days, every American newspaper picked up story. The Harrington scandal, they called it, crime of the century. Theodore was arrested, fraud, conspiracy, accessory to murder. His trial lasted 3 months, the most sensational legal proceeding of the decade. Witness after witness testified about Harrington family crimes, servants who kept silent for years, business partners cheated, victims who never dared speak. Theodore Harrington was convicted on all counts. Sentenced to 20 years in prison. He died there 3 years later of fever sweeping through his cell block. Newspapers reported no one claimed his body. Harrington assets were seized and liquidated. The railroad empire sold piece by piece. The Newport mansion put up for auction, and Solomon Graves, using fortune built over 30 years, bought it. 6 months after the ball, Solomon stood before Rosecliff Manor. The building had transformed, gaudy decorations gone, ostentatious wealth displays removed. Replaced by simple furnishings, practical equipment, and something never existing in this house before. Children. 50 black children, orphans and refugees from harsh northern streets, now lived in the mansion built with slave labor. They slept in rooms where wealthy guests once danced. They ate in dining halls where champagne once flowed. They learned reading and writing in libraries filled with unread books. The Bessie Graves School for Negro Children opened its doors in April 1892. Solomon hired best teachers available, stocked library with thousands of books, equipped workshops for learning trades. He created something the Harringtons could never imagine, a place where slave descendants could become doctors, lawyers, teachers, leaders, a place where his mother's dream could finally come true. On opening day, Solomon hung a bronze plaque by front entrance. In memory of Bessie Graves, 1825 to 1863. Slave. Mother. Hero. She dreamed of a world where her son would be free. This building is that dream made real. May every child who enters these doors carry her spirit forward into the future. Solomon lived another 30 years. He saw the school grow from 50 students to 500. He saw graduates become doctors healing sick, lawyers fighting for justice, teachers educating next generations. He saw the world begin changing, slowly, painfully, toward something better. He never married. Never had children of his own. The students at his school became his family. They called him Uncle Solomon, later Grandpa Solomon. They sat at feet listening to stories about old days, slavery and freedom and the long road between. On his deathbed in 1922, surrounded by children and grandchildren of students he taught, Solomon spoke final words. Mama. I did it. I kept my promise. He was buried beside the oak tree where Martha hid medallion 73 years before. His tombstone was simple, a name and 2 dates. But beneath dates, at Solomon's request, was carved a single sentence. The truth will make you free. The Bessie Graves School continued operating until 1954, merging with other institutions following Brown v. Board of Education. Over 6 decades, it educated more than 10,000 students. Many became leaders in civil rights movement. Some remembered the old men who founded school, the former slave with gray eyes who brought down one of America's most powerful families. Solomon Graves never became famous. His name doesn't appear in history books. The Harrington scandal has been largely forgotten, overshadowed by wars and crises that followed. But his legacy endures. Every black doctor healing patients, every black lawyer winning cases, every black teacher inspiring students, they are all in some way children of Solomon Graves, descendants of his dream, proof that one man's courage can change the world. The Harringtons built their empire on cruelty and greed. They believed money and power could protect them from justice forever. They were wrong. Solomon Graves proved truth cannot be buried, justice cannot be bought, the sins of the past will always catch up with those who commit them. He proved revenge isn't about destroying enemies, it's about building the world they tried to deny you. It's about turning pain into purpose. It's about living so fully that their memory fades while yours becomes eternal. That is the true story of the heir of shadows, a slave who became a millionaire, a son who avenged his mother, a man who turned a mansion of oppression into a house of hope.